Before I start the video, I once again want to thank you all for all the support you showed on the last Hoi4 video, with extra thanks to Andy Blob 4087 and Luca Chad Unilel D6L for suggesting these paths. And if you have any other suggestions for other games or mods I could play, please leave them down below. But please, don't suggest any more Kaiserreich, as I've been getting bored of it. But anyway, back to the video. In the First World War, America would lend considerable amounts of money to the Allied powers. But after the defeat, the Americans wouldn't get any of their money back, as the new revolutionary governments had refused to pay back the loans, while the old governments, which were now in exile, would be in too bad of a state to pay. Without the repayments of these loans, the roaring 20s of our time wouldn't happen, and with the Great Depression still happening, and Black Monday to add on to it, it would seem inevitable that the country would collapse. But there was a light at the end of the tunnel, as Alf Landon, running for the Republicans, would promise an end to the economic fallout and a return to normalcy. So the first step to avoiding the Civil War and getting Alf Landon in charge is like most other paths for America, as you start by going down the Gardner-Wagner bill tree, with the right side in particular being the side you want to do for this path. And after selecting one of the choices that makes the bill go through, you'll wait until about late February for the Republican nominee event to show up. And in this event, you want to make sure you pick the bottom option, which is backing Landon. And after that, your choices don't really matter up until the election event in early November. Then, once the election comes around, you'll pick the top option, which is Alf Landon. Then, you'll have to select the correct options in a series of events. And the easiest way to get through these events is by selecting the top option in all these events, except for the demand funding event, which, after, if you did it right, you will get a compromise achieved event and a stability returns to the United States super event. And so, with these events done, I wouldn't have to go through a civil war, which means I would have a unified United States a whole 3 years before I would in my MacArthur video. But before I get to liberating countries, I had to fix my economy, which wouldn't take too long, as all I had to do was go down the tree I got for Alf Landon. And after about 2 years of fixing my economy and getting ready for war, I'd finally get some action, as Nicaragua would decide to invade some of their Central American neighbors. And, as a protector of the Americas, I couldn't let this happen. So I would decide to ask the Mexicans if I could move through their territory. And because we are best friends, they would happily accept. And so, to thank them for their kind gesture, I would liberate them into my territory. And of course, seeing that my intentions were good-hearted, the Third International would also decide to stop fighting me and allow me to have the territory. And once I had gotten through Mexico, I would deal with the reason I came down here. But while I was down here, I would also make sure this would never happen again. So to protect the other Central American countries from ever being invaded again, I would annex them into my territory. And if you think these annexations are unjustified and the people don't want it, just look at this happy Mexican guy. I mean, how could these liberations be unjustified if the people are clearly happy with it? But anyway, after doing that, I would launch a naval invasion of Cuba, which didn't take too long. And after that, I would also invite some South American countries to my faction that I didn't want to invade later. Well, except for Paraguay and Bolivia, because they are doing their own thing. But now with that out of the way, I would start preparing an invasion of Canada to liberate them from the tyranny of universal healthcare. And because I didn't have a civil war, that means my buildup was much faster than the Canadians, leading to the division ratio being even worse than it was in the MacArthur video, as while I had a full army group, they couldn't even muster up enough divisions to guard their border with me. So with this division disparity in mind, once the invasion started, it would be easy to understand why I did so well, as this time around, I would even be able to capture Vancouver Island before they could fortify it, unlike in my MacArthur video. And after speed blitzing through most of their country, and taking their most valuable victory points, they would capitulate. And after finishing off the few French divisions that ended up encircled after I capitulated Canada, I would move my army to Brazil and would start preparing a naval invasion of French Africa. And while waiting on the naval invasion preparations to be done, I would get out another army group, as the main reason I wanted French Africa was so I could get an easy gateway into Europe, and to actually take Europe, I would need a big army. But anyway, after getting out my second army group, the naval invasion would launch. And thankfully, there were no divisions on the coast to defend against it. And with the initiative, I would push the troops I already had so I could get an even bigger beachhead. and once that was done, I would move my entire army group over to help with the invasion. And if things weren't already good enough, they would also send a good chunk of their divisions behind my lines where they were encircled. And honestly, this might be one of the worst decisions I've ever seen from an AI, proving that even when they're not in their homeland, the French can still find a way to fuck up fighting a war. And with that ingenious move from the French, and my army just being so much better, I'd be able to easily take most of their Central and Western African holdings. And this was so easy in fact, that there is basically no footage of me actually taking the land, as I had just gotten bored and decided to invade some random Central American countries. And since the French invasion wasn't done by the time I was done invading the Central American countries, I would speed up the process by going through Morocco. And even though they were in the Reich Pact of Germany, it was that point in the game where they were getting jumped by everyone else, meaning that they would be a non-factor in this war. So if bypassing Morocco and my troops somehow crossing the Sahara Desert, because they can just do that in this mod, I would be able to capitulate the French. And thankfully, the Third International had already taken care of Spain, which meant that we would be able to get the peace conference instantly. And with Spain also capitulated, that meant I could get a foothold in Europe, which would allow me to invade the rest of it later. And while I waited to invade Europe, I would decide to invade the Cairo axis, because why only stop at a part of Africa? And even though this would lead to both of my army groups being taken up, as my second army group was already fighting Germany in Middle Africa, this wouldn't be an issue, as I had gotten out a third army group by this time, which would allow me to invade Europe while also doing with Africa at the same time. But it would take a bit for my new army group to get over to Spain, so in the meantime I would invade Argentina, strengthening my grip over the Americas, and would also watch as my army took Africa with relative ease. With my liberation of Africa going so well in fact, that I could also send my second army group to go help my third with the liberation of Europe. And once both my army groups have reached Spain, I would declare war on the Third International, which, due to my vastly superior numbers, would be a cakewalk, as most of their troops are already fighting the Germans. And by the time I had finished with Spain and started pushing into France, the Germans had already broken through their lines and had almost gotten to Paris. And with the joint push, the French didn't last long. But even with them capitulating, my job wasn't finished, as I had to still deal with Britain, but more importantly, I was still at war with Germany. But thankfully, the Russians had already taken most of Germany, which meant all I had to do was take their western territories. And after taking most of western Germany, and Russia finally capturing Berlin, they would capitulate. And in the peace deal, I would give Russia all of Eastern Europe and the lands they had taken in Germany, while I had taken Western Europe and the overseas territories that the Reich Pact countries had, leaving Europe in a pseudo-Cold War split. And now with Germany out of the way, I would start preparing a naval invasion of Britain. And while I waited for it to be done, I would clean up the Italian peninsula and the remnants of the Reich Pact, which wouldn't be too hard, as most of the remaining countries were either too weak, or were already mostly invaded by me. But anyway, once the naval invasion had landed, and I had taken a port, I'd move the rest of the army group, and some new tank divisions I had made, over to Britain. And with the help of my new tank divisions, and the British army already being weakened by the war in mainland Europe, it wouldn't take too long for them to capitulate. And now with most of Africa and Western Europe liberated, I would realize that I actually had a pretty good chance of being able to liberate the whole world before my game started running like a PowerPoint presentation. So, I would quickly set my eyes on liberating Eastern Europe from the tyranny of Russian oppression. And so after moving my army over to the Russian border, and filling out an entire army group with the previously mentioned tank divisions, I would declare war. And believe it or not, having 3 full army groups, plus another army group full of tanks, will lead to you steamrolling your enemy. And even though the main front moved quickly, with most of Eastern Europe that wasn't part of Russia proper being taken over, I would also have to redirect some of my troops to deal with the allies I didn't realize Russia had, which slowed down my main front by a bit. But even with some of my divisions being redirected, I would still have the overwhelming numbers advantage, which would lead to me pushing into Russia proper at an extremely quick rate. But because of the war's short notice, I wouldn't be able to get any collaboration governments on Russia done, which meant I would have to push very far into Russia for them to capitulate. But after capturing basically everything east of the Ural Mountains, and even going past them, they would capitulate. And now with Russia out of the picture, I could start preparing the liberation of Asia. But before I could do that, I would have a couple loose ends to deal with the first of those loose ends being the Nordic Federation and Greece, as they were a part of the Russian faction, but didn't also capitulate when Russia did. So that meant I would have to deal with them, and once I started focusing on them, there was basically no chance of them surviving. And with the first list in being dealt with, that meant I could focus on the second, which was Australia and the rest of the Entente remnants. And thankfully, earlier in the game, when I capitulated the Reichspakt, I would also get the Dutch East Indies off the Netherlands. That meant I would have the perfect launching off point for an invasion of Australia. And once I got there and cleared off Papua New Guinea of the Australian troops that were already there, I would prepare and launch a naval invasion of Australia. And since the Australians were a weak country, I'd be able to get an invasion off easily and be able to also push into their country very easily. And with that plan going swimmingly, I would set my eyes on India so I could get revenge for what happened last video. But once I declared war, it went about the same as it did in the Percy Holbert video, as once again the lack of supply would screw me over, as I would even invade Iran to see if this would fix it, but spoiler alert, it didn't. And now with the horde of my allied divisions soaking up what's left of the supply, it would seem all but lost, but then I would look into the past, thinking upon my invasion of Morocco to make the French capitulate faster. Then it hit me. An invasion of Japan and China to widen the front with India and get around their divisions. It was genius. Something on the level of Einstein. Well, I guess haters are gonna hate. But anyway, with my allies continuing to hold off the Indians, I would start my grand liberation of East Asia. And once the invasion started, I would quickly get a naval invasion of Japan off, and would quickly move to secure the whole island. And on the other hand, the Chinese front would go even better, as I would quickly take northern China, and after a bit more pushing, I would force them to capitulate. And not long after, with the capture of Nagasaki, the Japanese too would capitulate, which would leave the weak and alone Thai all by themselves. But this would be difficult for one reason. As per fucking usual, my allies were dumb enough to sack an absolutely ungodly amount of troops on the front, which would lead to there being no fucking supply. I mean, look at this. You can't even see the entire stack of troops on my screen. But thankfully, at least the plan to beat India worked, as I would be able to get a big breakthrough. And with the bigger front and my supply issues fixed, there's basically no way they could stop me. But before I could capitulate them, through sheer force, the Thai would capitulate and I would get a peace deal for them and their allies. And right after that, I would also get one for India. And with the defeat of those two factions, there is basically nowhere else to liberate except for the small bits and pieces I couldn't be bothered to invade. So, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and if you want to see any more countries, mods, or games in particular, leave them in the comments below. And with that out of the way, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.